All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Joe Wright. We're at Left Coast Cellars. It's June 15th, 2021. Joe, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
First question to get you started is why wine?
Why wine? It's been a long time. There's been nothing else in my life, quite frankly. As far as occupational stuff goes, I started making wine when I was 21, and I'm 49. So, God, what was before that? Just kind of a little bit of school and partying and figuring out what, not really, it just fell into it. So, that's a story in and of itself, but yeah, it's all I've done. Maybe one day I'll retire and crank on mountain bikes, part-time, but otherwise that's all I know how to do is grow grapes and make wine from them.
Well, let's get into the story then of how wine. So tell me about kind of before that, upbringing. Where did you grow up and where did you go to school?
Grew up in Burbank, California, in SoCal. Just basic, through high school, a little bit of college, never finished. That was it. As far as I kind of made a leap from there. I was going to, so out of high school, I was getting really interested. My father was really avid outdoorsman, so he was kicking me out to up into the high Sierras. We were spending long trips, backpacking, backcountry stuff, and I ended up getting to know kind of the area up there as far as some of the lodges, some of the work crews actually, and started going back and working. So I was really interested, and this is kind of where the headwaters of the the Edison company, basically where all the water from comes from for Los Angeles, LA Basin. Mm-hmm. So I was getting to, I met, knew the dam tender and the whole crew up there, and was really intrigued by just the massive amount of work that had been done, probably during the 1940s, to get water down to LA. It was fascinating. You're way out in the backcountry, and there's these massive lakes and underground tunnels and waterways and waterworks that just let it flow, and that was probably one of the first things that just intrigued me in life in general as far as an occupation might go. So I was looking towards studying towards a degree in hydrology, and helping, ultimately, pretty narrow view, but just working with the Edison company and getting water moving. So it was just fascinating to me. So up in the high Sierras, met my wife. She was working at one of the lodges. We're way up there. She actually ran a boat. We're cutting trees today.
All good.
Tending vines, cutting trees, mowing grass. Met my wife up there. She was working in one of the lodges. She was actually running a boat across a rather large lake, getting supplies to PCT hikers in the backcountry, which was pretty, in and of itself, just quite a haul to get stuff from point A to point B. Anyway, the season ended. Her and I were about to go our separate ways and decided that just wasn't going to happen, and ended up traveling. Buying a camper and a truck and just kind of cruising around the States. Landed in Colorado, and ultimately what I'm getting at is how I got into wine here. Found our way out into Colorado. We were in Glenwood Springs. We actually settled in for a little bit. I think we needed, I think we just needed some cash, so we got some jobs. I got a job at a wine shop, and she got a job at a hardware store, I think. And our plan was we were just going to work for 6 months and hit the road again and do it somewhere else. We were just having fun. We were young and that's what we were up to. So but I got a job at a wine shop in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. The owner there, or the at the time, Bob Jenkins, who's still a dear friend of mine today, he it's a surprise. I'm actually really surprised he even took me in, but whatever. He said he saw something in me. I don't know what he saw aside from just a young kid with dreadlocks down to his ass, and just somebody out having a good time snowboarding and mountain biking. But but he brought me in, and he was just an incredible advocate for employee education. He was kicking me out to the distributor tastings, inviting me in to when sales reps would come with their bag and tasting wines. You know, he actually sent me off to Aspen Food and Wine Fest back in the day. This is in the mid 90s. This is like 93, 4, 5. And that's where ultimately, I mean, that was where I learned, you know, my love for wine. And then, you know, the fact that, you know, of course there's the retail and the wholesale setting, and that's kind of what I was into for those years, and ended up doing a lot of wine buying for the shop, and thought that I'd play around with wholesale, but then one day realized there was the whole production end of it, and that, you know, there's, you know, careers in this field that you could get into. So one of the last things he kicked me out to do was actually put on in Aspen, Colorado, by the Oregon, I don't know what they called it back then, but Oregon Wine Advisory Board, I think is what it was called. And they were doing this national tour of kind of just, you know, marketing the Willamette Valley wine scene. You know, this is kind of, at least as far as I knew, back then in the mid 90s, you know, one of the first kind of big national marketing pushes. And they'd hit, like, as far as I remember, it was like New York, Chicago, Aspen, LA, that type of thing. And I spent 2 days, one night, kind of, if you can jump forward to like maybe like a little mini OPC, Oregon Pinot Camp, like road show, and hung out, listened, learned, tasted, ate, and just had that classic camaraderie of, you know, meeting the growers and meeting the winemakers and talking about the Willamette Valley and what makes it so great to grow wine grapes here, especially Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And that was it. I think we'd packed up within 2 months, and you know, and came out to the valley. So that was in probably December of 1996. So when I landed, I had my little book, you know, that I got at the show, and started flipping through it. That's actually I always used to get. I never had a problem getting a job. I would just open up a phone book and I'd be like, oh, marina, that looks like fun, or golf course, and I just cold call. I'd be like, hey, I'm looking for work, and I always had work, and so I did the same thing with the wine book. Started at the A's, ended at the Z's, got a couple interviews lined up and 2 job offers, and these are just general cellar hand positions, and accepted one. So that was in February of '96. I started my first job making wine with the crew at Willamette Valley Vineyards. It was great. So this wasn't great, but I kind of came in this in-between phase where the old winemaker, Dean Cox, had just passed away, I think, maybe, I don't know. It had only been months prior to my arriving. The assistant winemaker, Forrest Klafke, was in charge of making the wines, and he hired me. Oh, the crazy thing was, actually, too, one of the gentlemen that had put on that road show was the GM at Willamette at the time that I was hired too, and I got to see him there, and I think that connection certainly helped as well. But yeah, that was Kevin Chambers. Anyway, Forrest hired me, I think basically because of, I just had some, I think, just general good mechanical skills. Like, I knew what the pump was, and I knew how to wire the board up to it, and I knew what was in and what goes out, and like, you know, ultimately, you know, anyone, if you've made wine for 5 or 6 years, can make wine really well if you're paying attention. But to actually run a facility is a whole other thing, and there's a lot of moving parts, and you know, it's important to have people that don't just pick up the phone when something breaks, but can actually take care of the problem and keep things running. So I think that's why he hired me. Plus, the Kevin Chambers connection helped too. But let's see. Yeah, I worked at Willamette Valley, and then Joe Dobbs came on in like June or July of '96, and basically my whole tenure there was with Joe and Forrest. Joe and I actually left 6 years later in '02, just months apart from each other as well, onto, our grass is greener, whatever that was. And yeah, it was a great tenure there. Love the experience. You learn a lot fast. The place doesn't stop. It's going. And kind of that, they had a lot of estate vineyards then, of course, in and around the winery, and also the Tualatin estate. But a big part of their fruit portfolio was from third-party growers as well. And we probably dealt with a couple dozen other growers. So when I was given the opportunity after I had left to actually start my own winery from the ground up, and I kind of took that part of the model where I knew all these third-party growers personally. I'd been to many of their homes for dinner and this and that, and they were excited about this new project as well, and they basically helped me get up and running with just being able to source premium fruit from throughout the Willamette Valley. So that project from '02 to basically 2010, 8 more years, I worked at a winery called Belle Vallée, and that was in Corvallis, and it was one of the first kind of warehouse wineries, back then in '02 anyway. Now it's kind of commonplace. But yeah, so I spent a lot of years basically sourcing fruit from just gorgeous, high-end premium vineyards from throughout the Willamette Valley and blending, making a half dozen Pinot Noirs and a Pinot Gris, I think, because somebody wanted a white wine at the time. But yeah, we did that. The company kind of shifted focus. Long story short, and ultimately what it is today is still happening, is it's a custom crush facility. I was getting to this point where I needed more, I wanted more focus. You get that? That was the treat.
Nice.
Anyway, I think like most winemakers, again, like you make wine for 5 or 6 years, and if you're paying attention, you can do a pretty good job on it, given that the source, is quality. That I just needed more control over what I was making wine from, and so I'd actually been sourcing fruit from the Left Coast estate, which is where we're at right now, for about 3 or 4 years. Really beautiful estate, vineyards in the Van Duzer corridor, all on marine sedimentary soils, and had been just taken by it, year after year after year, especially after I figured out how to make that wine. And yeah, one day the GM and I were talking about, just kind of kicking around the idea of maybe me coming over here and making the wine. So at the time, Luke McCollum was running everything here, and the place was growing. He's trying to grow 150 acres of grapes. He's trying to make, all the wine. He's trying to keep all the administrative things going, and he needed to start delegating. So that's where I came in, as well as some other staff in hospitality and sales. And I think the company just kind of at that point, not just because of me, but because of it, leveled up with a whole new staff and started taking it to that next level. So yeah, the Pfaff family who owns Left Coast, they're wonderful in many senses, but in the sense that they just let me take my time. They're like, Joe, do what you have to do. Don't burn any bridges. Finish your job, and we're here. So when you're done. And so I spent 10 kind of consulting in the winery here, and basically, I think I started in June of 11 at Left Coast Estate. So and then again, didn't burn any bridges and get everything running just fine over at Belle Vallée. I left, and people got into my place, and it was great, and just kind of moved over here. So now, I'm making, more or less 25,000 cases of wine off of 160 acres planted. And since I started in 2011 as just the winemaker, and barely overseeing the vineyards. But now my job here is I direct all the vineyard and winery operations, and that's kind of where I'm at today. So goal met, basically there are no excuses. My GM tells me, Taylor, our Pfaff, a family member, he just tells me, what I've got to ideally make every year. And so we grow it and we follow it through.
All right, I'm going to back up just for a second here. You mentioned the way you got your wine education through wine shop and through a lot of tastings and a lot of that. So tell me about learning wine, both like sort of the nomenclature of wine and also like developing your palate. How long did it take, and what were some of the key parts for you in terms of feeling like you understood wine?
Gotcha. Well, I mean, the learning about making wine was just through the trade. It was just, coming in with a good work ethic, head down, having incredible winemakers around me, and just watching and learning and just paying attention to detail. The learning is constant, especially now in the vineyard. I mean, your ethos changes every 7 to 10 years, every decade. And now it's just, and I see it perpetuating, but less is more. From the end back, as far as in the winery, the inputs are less and less and less and less every year, and the inputs in the vineyard are gradually becoming less and less and less now that we're figuring out how to manage them and produce quality. So as far as learning, when did my palate come and all that, I mean, I'm still, I could never say, oh, I nailed it in 2002. I mean, it's just constantly evolving. Same with, just the Oregon Pinot Noir and Oregon Chardonnay, that they're always evolving, so our palates have to evolve with them, right? I mean, if we get stuck in 2010, nothing's going to get potentially better, or we'll never learn from our mistakes. So stylistically, things are evolving, and which is important because Oregon is a distinct and unique wine group. The Willamette Valley is distinct and unique, and we need to just keep, focusing on that, and so that we're distinct and unique from the rest of the world. We are already, but there's room for growth there still.
Tell me about your first year at Willamette Valley. What do you remember about your first harvest, or first time through the year? What was the job like, and what attracted you to it?
To my first year there, what attracted me to it was, precedingly, like just the idea of what I thought I knew from visiting with these winemakers and wine growers. Of course, reality just smacks you in the face when you're on the floor. It's 2 a.m. There's 60 tons of fruit on the crush pad. It's raining. There's no cover. You're freaking cold. That was horrible. It was horrible. I had a night shift. So we'd pull in at 6 in the evening and leave at 7 in the morning. I think I swore I'd never do that again. But yeah, anyway, here I think I'm going on 25 vintages this year. But that was that, and then you have, it's over. You have time to reflect. Any hardship, if you're at all aware, you should have learned something from. And so when the dust settled, and I did, and I moved forward, and the next year I was given maybe a responsibility, and and not just a general work situation, but a responsibility to like run the presses or something like that, or whatever it was. And then it grew from there. I think by year 3, probably, I was running the night shift. So I had my whole crew of a dozen people, and so and you feed off of that, of course. And it just went from there.
Tell me, at what point did you start? You mentioned sort of 5 or 6 years of making wine. You feel like you kind of understand how to make wine if you're paying attention. At what point did that 5 or 6 years start for you? What point did you start sort of seeing the winemaking process for what it was and understanding it kind of all the way through?
Well, when I started, it was so 5 or 6 years after '96 is '02, the start of Belle Valet, a winery that I got to design within certain boundaries and build a business plan for. So yeah, I thought I knew it all then. But in hindsight, I mean, again, yeah, there's so much to learn. But we did great. '02 was a great vintage to start your own winery. Chimp could have made wine that year. I mean, it was like the fruit was just beautiful. You didn't have to do anything to it. It was perfect. Mother Nature set the fruit set. It was just mild and a long, just Indian summer type thing, and late fall, and just. Yeah, it was cool. This high acid, low alcohol, physiologically ripe, just everything, that's why you want to be in Oregon for those wines, those vintages, and we hang out and wait for those, but I just thought it was probably around then, but in hindsight, no, I didn't know anything. I was lucky with the '02 vintage. Then the '03 came and slapped me in the face and said, "You know nothing, sir." That was just an incredibly hot vintage. It was kind of like actually 2020, except for the fire. In '03, we had those Northwest Columbia winds roll out and hot, and what we typically pick up against walls of rain weather, we were picking up against heat and not desiccation, but raisin. We were just like really trying to get fruit off the vine before it went completely raisin. So. And it was a hot summer, so we didn't have the physiological ripeness in '03, but we had, the heat at the very end. So what happened is it basically shriveled up and concentrated all these very unripe flavors, and unripe tannins, and so they were like black, inky, concentrated, high acid, extremely tannic wines that I'd love to make a do-over. I need a do-over on that vintage. We learned a lot.
You mentioned sort of some of the sites you were working with. You'd had kind of access through Winemaker Vineyards and kind of grew with that. Tell me about working with various sites and learning learning the vineyards you're working with. What do you need to know as a winemaker buying third-party fruit, and how long does it take you to know it?
Well, I mean, it all comes down to personal preference. I mean, of course, if you've got, you're making wine for somebody, that's one thing, but you always are, and ultimately, I've been lucky enough to always been able to just make it for myself. So then you're like, all right, well, what do I like? What differentiates one vineyard from another? Well, obviously, microclimate, soil. I mean, terroir. It's everything, obviously. It's the unique conditions within the site that you're working from, and I originally had gravitated towards warmer volcanic sites, and mid elevation. I would say between like 500 and 700 feet. It was just kind of what I like to drink and what I like to make. Again, we're always evolving or devolving, I don't know, but we're always moving on one direction or another. And then I started, playing around with more sites like this, that are on these old ancient seabeds. And again, maybe a little lower. These soils only poke their heads out of the ground between like 250 and 500 feet in elevation, and then you start getting into the volcanic. That's just, to your question though, that's how I would pick fruit, basically, on what I like to drink, where did that come from, and then just really figuring out, where those places were. And of course, that said, we still had a wide array of different sites we were working with, sedimentary sites, volcanic sites, all elevations, high elevations, low elevations. It was a way to not put all your eggs in one basket, of course, and diversify, and ultimately in the end you're going to have something really sweet to work with for those higher end bottlings, and the blends for your estate bottlings always come out, you know, very indicative of just whatever that vintage had to give you.
You said something earlier about sort of learning to work with this particular fruit in the Van Duzer. What's different about it here? What did you have to learn to make it the best?
Probably you can really easily over extract this fruit here. So we're on marine sedimentary soils. The top soils are pretty shallow. I think that, you know, not all marine sedimentary is shallow, but in this case, you have two things that happen, and I'm looking at the vineyards, like kind of envisioning this, but so you have these old ancient seabeds. This marine sedimentary, by the way, is just like basically sand and silt that found its way from the atmosphere to the bottom of the ocean. The weight of the ocean just smashed on it for a million years, I guess, and created, you know, our bedrock in essence. And so that's what we grow on here. Everything on the estate is that. And then we have topsoils, of course, but we have very shallow topsoils. And the reason I think, and actually a friend, Andy Gallagher, who's our soil guy in the Willamette Valley, is when those Missoula floods came down from Montana through the Columbia Gorge and backfilled into the Willamette Valley. In these foothills between the Cascades and the coastal range, we have these little outcroppings of hills. And so what happens is, you know, when there were some bottlenecks in which when those flows came down, they got smashed tighter and started gaining velocity. And so in areas in these foothills, we have scouring of topsoil. So there's just nothing but these, you know, basically you can, at the top of that hill right there, you can dig 3 inches, 4 inches and find seashells. So that said, water holding capacity is very minimal, and that creates a devigorated vine, ultimately a smaller cluster, a smaller berry, skin to juice ratios a lot less, very concentrated, potentially very tannic wines. So after making those very concentrated tannic wines, we started learning how to basically just ease up and create much softer wines that basically told more of the story of where these wines were grown. And there's a little more to it as far as that. Then it's even accentuated as far as that concentration of all those by the Van Duzer corridor and the prevailing winds that kick out in about 3 hours. At about 1 o'clock every day till the evening, it just blows through here, and again that just sucks the moisture, the water out of the clusters and creates a more concentrated wine. So really unique growing area right here. It's different. The Ola Hills are just adjacent to us. It's different. And it's not better or worse. It's just what it is, and you have to figure out where you're growing your grapes and how to make those wines.
So, given all those factors and all the kind of uniqueness of this site and of this area, how long does it take you to feel comfortable making the key decisions you have to make on a site like this? How long till you know your site? Oh God, I learn every year, because this Left Coast Estate's really unique. It's got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 really distinct and unique vineyards within the estate itself. It's not just one monoculture cut out like the top of this picnic table. We've got different elevations, row orientations, soil depth, and then different aspects that allow for more or less sun and more or less wind. And so anyway, it's a constant. Yeah. It'd be boring if it weren't. You said something earlier that I thought was really interesting. You talked about how your palate changes as the wines here change, as the grapes here change. So how in the years you've been making wine in Oregon, how have Pinot Noir and Chardonnay changed? And what are they like now versus sort of the Pinot Noir Chardonnays you were introduced to here in the mid-90s?
In my opinion, in the mid-90s, maybe what we had to compare to was, just California Chardonnay. So now, if that were the case, and I think it was, we're now basically trying to make this warm climate wine out of cool climate grapes. And it just didn't work, and it went away. I mean, Chardonnay, for the most part, went away. And by the way, there are total exceptions to this. There are producers that have kicked out great Chardonnay throughout the 90s and 2000s. But they were far and few in between, and especially compared to today. I think everybody's jumped on this bandwagon. But anyway, basically embracing maybe more of that Chablis-esque style of Chardonnay. So embrace, just embracing these clones that maybe retain a lot of acid, and the pH doesn't get incredibly high, and picking at lower sugars, and just creating maybe a Chardonnay that it drinks well today, but why not let it lay down for 10 or 15 years, like the great Chardonnays of the world. So, for Chardonnay, that's been, you've probably doing what you're doing. You've heard this. This is it. So, it's been really exciting. And yeah, why shouldn't we be able to lay down a Chardonnay just like a Pinot Noir? There's no excuse for it. So I think that's something I've, as well as a lot of my peers have embraced, and it's working. I think that it's amazing to me how many people that you're like, are you gonna try the Chardonnay? And they're like, I don't like Chardonnay, but I'll taste it, and then they love it. And then it's just like, we just need to get it in more and more of the hands of these folks that basically have this idea of Chardonnay that isn't what we're doing here. It's what the idea of what Chardonnay is somewhere else. So Pinot Noir, I don't know. I think really, I hope the focus for Pinot Noir has been just a more, and everything we grow in the Willamette Valley, but just that less is more kind of attitude. Every time you do something to your wine in the winery, you're basically adding a layer, a veil between what it truly is and maybe what you're trying to make it. So the wines that I fall in love with are the wines that are just truly vindicative of where they're grown, that have that sense of place. And you can tell because they're different. What happens when you start making wine and meddling with wine and sticking your fingers in the wine is now all those winemakers that are doing that are using the same product, and now all the wines start tasting the same, and there's no differentiating between one and another. And I am generalizing, right? But this is what could be a problem now and in the future, and I just hope that we can fall back from that and really start working on taking care of our vineyards and letting nature take its course in a more natural way. This is still agriculture, but we've just got to figure out how to minimize the inputs in the vineyard. We've got to figure out how to minimize the amount of water we put on our vines. It's going to become a commodity even here in the Willamette Valley very soon. And there are ways. There are really, really simple ways. We just have to forget what we think we know, remember what we did know a long time ago, and maybe retool a little bit, and get back to the essence of, this natural product. And, all that said, we would never let that ethos or an ego get in the way of making a good wine. It's great to have the tools and the knowledge and the know-how to make sure that, we can, if something zigs, we can zag it right back. But that's kind of what my hopes are.
Well, on that note, tell me about the farming here. You mentioned kind of director of viticulture and winemaking here. So tell me about the farming here. How has it changed since you've been here? How would you describe the farming, and do you have goals for more change to come?
Yeah, totally. Well, let's just say since I started just the 18 vintage, are taking baby steps, So, this isn't my vineyard, it's the Pfaff family's vineyard. There are a lot of people employed here, and we all want to stay employed. So, I'm not going to just, again, jump into something that I'm not totally aware of. But that said, since the 18 vintage, we've eliminated herbicides in roughly half of the vineyard. We have 14, 24, 32, about 36 acres that we've converted for the last, actually only 14 acres for the last 4 years to an organic program, and the balance, the 30 some acres now, is being farmed organically. And anyway, we'll keep moving towards that. Next year, in 2021, will be the elimination of herbicides throughout the vineyards. We're going to talk as a group this week, actually, about what that's going to take, make it happen, and then ultimately, in successive years, but hopefully not too far out, eliminating the use of herbicides on the entire estate. Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot of grounds here. It's a 500-acre property, and they're easy to use and they're effective. But these are just some of the steps that we're looking at in the vineyard, and and the whole, because it's not, the vineyard is the whole 500 acres, even though it's only 150. It's all the greenways, the oak savannas, the grasslands, everything. So it's all intertwined, all interconnected. And we'll start with the vineyards, but ultimately we have to be talking about this whole thing as a living organism, not just the vineyards.
So given all we've talked about with the vineyards and the space here, what is unique about the wines you're creating here? What's different? What makes them like Left Coast? What makes them unique to the space?
Well, the terroir, so the marine sedimentary soils that we've discussed, and the Van Duzer corridor. So a little more about that. We touched on the prevailing winds that hit every day, the concentration of, as a result. The other thing is just what comes with that is ultimately lower growing degree units. So we ideally will have longer hang time. So, the falls in the Willamette Valley can be rather abrupt. Summer, done, winter. From one day to the next. So again, though, ideally, if we have a long extended fall, we have just a really cool growing season. And what we get out of that, and what I hang on for every year, and we get every 3 years, maybe one. Have we got one after another? No, not in the last decade. But what does that look like? It's just incredibly physiologically ripe, phenologically ripe fruit at low sugar, like 22, 23 brix, and just black, ripe, beautiful wine, with, acid retention and low alcohol. And you can, I used to judge maybe the quality of a bottle of wine and whether or not I could drink the entire thing and not be overwhelmed by one aspect of it or another. So it's like the best bites of food are the first 2 or 3 bites. After that, you don't taste anything in particular anymore. So with wine, I think that if you can drink a few glasses, or hell, the bottle, and not be overwhelmed by alcohol, and not be overwhelmed by acidity or tannin or bitterness or whatever, that's balance, right? And you can get that if you have that hang time without the sugar and all that alcohol to obscure it all. So in the best years, that's what the Left Coast estate can give. And to me, that to me is perfection. Not to everybody, but God, those wines are just, that's why I'm here. That's why I'll be here.
So this site, you mentioned 500 acres, lots of vineyards. What are the biggest challenges for you? You mentioned kind of that your year no longer has any real downtime in it. What are the biggest challenges for you, and what are the parts you look forward to the most?
The biggest challenges are, well, I guess that we only get to do this, like, if you're lucky enough to, or unlucky enough to have started when I did when you're 21, 22 years old, is that we only get to do it like 30 or 40 times. So figuring it out in a lifetime, it's too short. But yeah, so that's the challenge. The challenge is really not chasing it, but somehow staying at par or getting ahead of it, and always trying to, every decision we make is to figure out what it is you're trying to accomplish. It takes 2 or 3 or 4 years, or longer in the vineyard. I mean, in the vineyard, it's 8, 9, 10 years before you can really like feel what it is that dirt, what those vines are going to give you. So that would be, one of the hardest things to try to, keep up with, I guess. But you had a second part of that question.
What keeps you coming back? What do you look forward to?
Well, I guess just those challenges. I mean, how boring would it be to not have something like these big, like life goals, So just trying to stay at par, stay ahead of, these decisions that you can't get anything back from for 3 or 4 or 10 years, and just constantly thinking about it. So you don't clock in or out here. It's always on your mind, and it's a good thing. I'm glad I found it.
Well, speaking of challenges, let's talk about 2020 for a second and the kind of the dueling challenges of last year. We start with the pandemic. Pandemic hits last spring. Tell me about sort of initial reaction, both personally and professionally, and what are the decisions and changes you had to make here to keep things going last year? What changed in your kind of work life?
Not much, quite frankly. Right? A lot changed, but like physically, when you think back on like getting up, getting ready, being here, none of this stops. That said, like a lot of wineries, we had to, pull the plug on a lot of like capital projects, just like intensive projects. We wanted to, make sure that April of 2020, as far as wine sales go, wasn't going to happen in May and June and July, because then it's all done, right? But it didn't, and we all settled into our houses and started popping bottles. So that was good. No, personally, certainly we all have our stuff with that as far as that happening, but just learning. We all learned what to do, right? So we'll be pros if it ever happens again in our lifetime, but especially from all the mistakes potentially that we made too. But yeah, so on a personal level, just all the learning how to do everything, and how to stay. I haven't had a cold in 18 months. I get a cold like twice a year. Just a common cold. But at work, none of this stops. We were here. We had to, because if you weren't out there taking care of the vines, it would take a year or two to regain, what it was you were doing out there. So that said, there's, in essence, this all this noise and this war of everything going on outside of here, and that was slightly distracting, of course. But I don't know, humans are good at just putting their heads down and getting things done, especially when things get a little thick and a little crazy. And we did.
Well, and then, of course, the second part of that is the fires you mentioned last harvest. So tell me about
what
that.
Fires?
I remember vaguely some smoke around here.
Really?
Tell me about that. And same kind of thing. As it's happening, what are the decisions you have to make, and what are the changes you have to make?
Yeah, well, none of us in the Willamette Valley had experience with an event to that degree in 2020. It was horrible. You couldn't, for the camera, you couldn't see that truck or the trees in the background. It was that thick, and it was that thick for about 7 or 8 days. So enough to basically, impart, those phenolics into the cuticle of the grape, and it's there, it's done, it's in there. So anyway, what did we do? We basically, I was asked to go ahead and make as much wine as you think you need to make red wine, and learn as much as you can possibly learn. In the background, and we at Left Coast have always made, well, for 10 years now, we've made a white Pinot Noir. We embrace it. We distribute it in, I don't know, 40 states nationally, all the provinces, overseas, the UK. We make, and so now jumping forward again, typically I make about like 10 to 15,000 cases of red wine every year. This year I made about 10 to 15,000 cases of white Pinot Noir, and it came out beautifully. Mm-hmm. So it was a great vintage. Mm-hmm. It really was just set up so nicely. Mm-hmm. Mother Nature set the crop. It was light, but it was just a mild season. Everything was gorgeous. I mean, at the end it got a little warm, obviously, but the whites are electric, they're focused, they're beautiful. They have everything, the Chardonnays, the Rosés, the white Pinot Noirs. We still made them a little bit differently to try to mitigate and minimize the smoke potential impact it would have on the wine. But yeah, we just switched gears. We can't do that every year. We can't do that every other year, but we were able to do it this one year, and it's bottled, it's on the shelves, and it's selling. Mm-hmm. So yeah, big shift. This place runs smoothly, but like only because of how we do things, and then when you just flip it, and it was actually a lot of fun. It was like learning everything all over again as far as production goes and how to keep things running through the cellar. Mm-hmm. Like first year on the job at a new winery. Kind of exciting.
So between COVID and the fires, obviously an interesting harvest last year. So tell me about the sort of, what were the logistics you had to work through that were different, other than making it a whole different kind of, or more of a different kind of wine? What were some of the other logistics you had to deal with in terms of making sure your grapes were okay, making sure your people were okay?
Sure. Yeah, well, we just didn't pick. First of all, we weren't going to ask our crews to go out there. I mean, I was feeling claustrophobic, but it was okay, again, in the corridor here, we were a little delayed in, when we pick our fruit. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, I can't remember the dates anymore. So like the 21st or something it all started, I forget. And then it lasted about 8 or 9 days. But quite frankly, we didn't get really started picking until the first week of October. And by then, not only had it cleared up, and my dates could be wrong, but let's just shift it where when things cleared up, about a week later, and after a little bit of rain, mm-hmm. we started picking our fruit. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we did nothing. We were just close the doors, close the windows, and just keep trying to breathe. It was just so thick. But yeah, nothing out in the vineyard was happening during all that. You can't, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So when you saw the fruit, what was your reaction to it? If you came back after the smoke, you're picking it. What did it look like? What did you have to do to it to kind of figure out what to do next?
Well, after the event, again it rained. Subsequently, but prior to that, though, there was a lot of organic material falling from the sky in the vineyards. It was thick, but it all washed off. The crazy thing is you can't taste it. You pull the grapes and you throw a few berries in your mouth, and you couldn't say, oh my God, this tastes like an ashtray. No, it's just sweet, beautiful, fruity fruit. Mm-hmm. But when then you get a little heat, you get a little alcohol in the mix, things start extracting that weren't extracting in your mouth otherwise, and then you start picking it up. So, yeah, we ran a course of experiments, probably about 28 different experiments in the cellar. My take, these wines, when you get let's just say somebody off the street to taste these wines, they like them. they're fine. As a winemaker, I don't like, first off, it's hard, like, so we've done everything to mitigate this potential risk. And then let's say it worked. But all this, what you did, like, now they're unrecognizable. These aren't the wines I make, So like, even if you've done a good job at doing that, now all of a sudden the house style's just blown up. Like, it's just, everything's different. So, and it's with reds, the whites, everything was sound just the way we always made them. But yeah, that was kind of disheartening. It was like, hey, this kind of works. Oh, but that's not what we do here. So yeah, that's something I'm still kind of reckoning with at this point. I'm talking a year.
So we talked a bit earlier about how sort of the wines here have changed since you've been in Oregon. Tell me about how the industry has changed. What's changed in the industry in the 25 years you've been here?
Oh, in 25 years, well, we've learned a lot. Jesus, in the vineyards and in the wineries, for sure. Yeah, I have like a 1993 Oregon issue of the Wine Spectator, and it's got all the good old guys in there talking about growing grapes and winemaking. Oh my God, we were just so young and such a fledgling industry even then. That we've learned, and it's just been exponential. I mean, my first decade, and certainly in the second. I mean, it's just information. And so many people all over the world growing grapes with the sole intention of making great wine. And all that information's available. Everybody's networked. So yeah, I just think that I mean, there's hundreds of things that have changed, all for the better. And can you imagine what will happen in the next 20? I'm actually afraid for the next 20.
Well, let's talk about that. That was my next question. So let's talk about the next 20.
Yeah, not afraid, but no, there are some actually solid things. I love, like, kind of all the remote, basically mechanics that, are becoming available. So the fact that I can pick up my phone and look at soil moisture at 4 and 6 and 24 and 36 inches and turn on some water. Shit like that's going to be really awesome. And I know a lot of that's happening in the wineries as well, especially during harvest and tank fermentations and temperatures. Just another thing, like, yeah, but no, there are a lot of great things to look forward to with regard to not just trying to get 6 hours of sleep and be worrying the whole time, but actually having that information and ability to make the adjustment if necessary.
Obviously, you've seen a lot of growth in terms of numbers of everything, numbers of labels, numbers of wineries, numbers of vineyards. Do you see that continuing? Do you see that the growth of Oregon wine continuing?
I have to imagine. I've not given it much thought, but yeah, I mean, yeah, totally. You two want to start a winery someday. I mean, everybody wants to get in this, and why not? So yeah, just just always, I always backpedal from how much are you gonna make and who you're selling it to, and then that often it's a starting point. But yeah, why not? To this degree, there's. The Willamette Valley is small with regard to premium vineyard growing sites. There's not an incredible amount of room left for those sites. I think for more production-oriented projects, absolutely, there's a potential for some massive growth still. But yeah, at some point, probably, fortunately for some, unfortunately for the consumer, what does that do? It just, prices increase because the supply versus demand is just, it's flipped. So yeah, I guess if anything, unfortunately, again, for the consumer, and I consider myself one, things are going to become kind of prohibitive to even purchase. Who knows when that'll happen, but yeah, that's ultimately, you know, where it's going to go.
And what about for you as you look ahead for your own future? What's coming next for you, both sort of here and any other projects you're kind of considering?
Oh, I can't wait to look back in this in 10. But yeah, no, I've just got so much to accomplish here still that this is easily my next 10 years. I've got my own label. I've had it since 2010. It's just my namesake. I don't have any brick and mortar winery or vineyards. It's called J. Wright Vintner. Left Coast has embraced the brand. In fact, they bought it from me and allowed me to pick fruit from the estate and source fruit and make it here. And they've helped with distribution, and I've got it in a number of states now. It's just a beautiful marriage, and it's been a lot of fun, and it's allowed me to basically, you know, everything's pretty much set here with regards to like labels and wine and just SKUs. And so, but this is, I make, you know, you don't know, but I hate when people say that, you know. I make about 700 cases of wine a year, and and I'm able to like just cherry pick like just crazy cool stuff that might get lost in the blend otherwise, you know, in these, and then just my fascination with different terroirs as well. So basically, you know, marine sedimentary, you know, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. But then, you know, I have an incredible volcanic site. You know Tom Mortimer? Have you met with him yet? You got to do that. The guy's fascinating. He's got like an 18 or maybe it's 11 acre vineyard up in the Chehalem Mountains, but you know, we refer to growers like as growers, but he's like, he doesn't just grow it, he gardens his vineyard. He knows every little thing about it. It's wonderful. So his west block is just literally planted in pitted volcanic basalt. So the absolute opposite of where we're standing, and just being able to showcase things like that. And then another site in the Ola Amity where we're pushing the limits on elevation. So at about 1,000 feet, growing some 777 and some Pomard, and don't always get to make red wine out of that, but when it works, it's fabulous. So that's kind of where I'm at with that brand, and just being able to have fun with very small, very just, what am I trying to say? It's just small, just purposeful sites, I guess. Yeah, just like we're picking fruit here, not because it's available, but because of this, and this, you know.
Talk about pushing elevation at 1,000 feet. Have you seen it? Have you seen those grapes change in the years you've been working with them? Have you seen them ripening more often or ripening earlier?
I think no. When you get up to that, when you're up there at that point, you know, that 900 plus, in my opinion, depends where you're at always, but no, it is, you never know. It's a gamble. It is a gamble. That said, I mentioned Kevin earlier. His vineyard's not far from that one. I think his starts at I know it's well over 1,000, but 1,200 feet. But I think it's mostly planted to Chardonnay too, and I think you can nail that every year as well. So I think if you're flexible, higher elevations, you know, can make, you know, you just got to think of it this way: like in great years, you make great red, and on not so great years, be open to making a white wine or a sparkling base. You know. Not bend, you know, that's the thing, you know, nobody's ever been successful trying to bend the will of, you know, the vineyard and the vintage. Embrace it, however great or bad it is, and you'll make great wine.
As you look for to the future, will we still be making the Pinots we're making now, as you look in the same style, the same elevations in the future, or is that going to change, in your opinion?
Well, I think that the Willamette Valley, I mean, yeah, I have friends all over California making great Pinot Noir in much warmer climates than we have here. And in ours and our kids' lifetimes, I can't imagine the Willamette Valley changing to that. So not in the next 100 years, but who knows? So I mean, there's a lot of room to, in time and a potential curve upwards in heat to still make great wine in the far future, into the far future. Mm-hmm. So stylistically, yeah, that's going to change things. It's part of terroir. It's gonna definitely create riper things. But we can plant at slightly higher elevations. We can plant at different slopes and aspects. We can, of course, different clones and rootstocks. We can always, kind of mitigate those things if we choose to. Some will just embrace the hot weather and make big, rich Pinot Noirs as well. But it's all good as long as stylistically speaking, if you're into big, thick, rich Pinot Noirs, if you're totally into that and that's what you like and you believe in it, and then it's going to be good, and I like those. I like a glass of them. They're great. But typically I want a second glass, and maybe I'll just move on to something else at that point.
So what advice would you have for someone who is interested in joining the Oregon wine industry? What would your words of wisdom be? Words
of wisdom? Oh, yeah, just start working, get into it. School's is great. I think that, I didn't. A lot of my friends haven't. Everybody that works for me has. Go figure. But I don't know. I don't think you necessarily have to go to school. I think school's a great place to have fun and prove to yourself that you can do your chores. But get out, get into the wineries, go travel the world. You can hit 3 vintages up all over the world and learn about, and get in the vineyard. Do that for 3 or 4 or 5 years, but get in the vineyard. That's where the wines are made, the great wines. Just all of that. Just get out and get into it. Why wait? Life's short. If you're gonna make wine, you only get to do it 30 or 40 times if you're lucky. So why waste any moment? Just get in there and start now, today, yesterday.
Awesome. That's all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have?
No, I think we're good.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, for your stories, for sharing the space with us.
Thanks for thinking about me.
Absolutely. And we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.